Hey everybody, this is Rick Weissinger. I'm a registered licensed dietitian, nutritionist, and certified health coach. And I'm going to give the audience just about another minute to join us before I start talking about our topic today, which is about fatigue, causes, and solutions. In the meantime, I'll give you folks some background about myself. I'm a healthcare consultant living in the Savannah, Georgia area currently. In the past, I've been a lot of things including a book author, a professional speaker, and I've worked in many different healthcare environments, including hospitals, dialysis centers, ambulatory care medical clinics, private practice, as an adjunct teacher at a number of colleges. Done a lot in my career. My favorite thing is to research the causes and solutions for most common health problems, and fatigue is my latest one. So this information that I'm going to be presenting comes from a book that I recently self-published on Amazon called Fatigue Fighters: How to Go from Wired to Tired and Reclaim Your Energy. And at the end of the presentation, you'll see a copy on the screen and a way you can access the book if you want it. So there's a lot to say about this topic, and if you have been dealing with fatigue, you probably are going to have a lot of questions, which I will do my best to answer. I'm going to talk for about 45 minutes, and then I will stop to answer any additional questions. And of course, I'll be stopping throughout the presentation to answer questions that come up on my screen. So first thing I want to say about fatigue is that it really is an epidemic and a silent epidemic. And it's interesting, we have an epidemic of COVID-19 cases, which have emerged as a leading killer of Americans. But fatigue is something that doesn't kill you, just makes you wish you were dead for a lot of folks. Because there's nothing like living with having no energy every day of your life. And the number of people that are affected by fatigue is growing all the time. It's as much as 40% of the average population, and it's present in up to 90% of people with chronic diseases. And currently, I believe the figure is that 60% of Americans have a chronic disease. So if we multiply 90% times 60%, that gives us roughly 54% of the American public that is walking around lacking energy, meaning they don't have the wherewithal to get up and do the things they want to do, such as being productive at work and going to get the physical exercise that they need. And we'll talk about the ramifications of not being able to exercise, because it actually leads to further fatigue. So there's quite a lot to say here. Let me begin by talking about the numbers and including the economic impact. Fatigue, as I was saying, affects, according to some studies, 38% of the average Americans, 40% of the working population. And according to studies that have been done of employees, many of employees are coming to work and they're just not being productive. They're it's a form of absenteeism called presenteeism, where they are present at work, but they're not as productive as they normally could be. And this is costing employers in the U.S. economy a huge amount of money. By some estimates, up to $411 billion per year, which includes the cost of not getting adequate sleep. And you can imagine how employers feel about this, having employees who show up for work and sit at the desk with their eyes half closed like this, not putting out as much work as they would normally be able to do because they haven't gotten the sleep that they need. Okay, hold on just 1 second, folks. Okay, forgot to shut off the stupid phone. It's a problem, another problem we all have, right? Okay, so let's talk about what causes fatigue, some correlates of fatigue, and then I'll talk about what's actually at the root of this problem, because it's actually quite interesting. The same things that cause chronic disease and the same things that cause depression are the same things that cause this type of fatigue. When we think about fatigue, we normally think about folks with anemia, right? But anemia is actually a very small percentage of the folks who are fatigued out there. Actually, more fatigue is caused by people who just don't drink enough fluid. We underestimate how much we need to drink. With global warming, we are losing more fluid from our bodies. And the problem with a lack of fluid is not just that we're not getting what our bodies need. The problem may be that when we don't get enough fluid, the amount of sodium in our blood increases because we all eat too much salt. If we all eat a lot of processed food, and processed food contains a heck of a lot of excess sodium, and that means that unless you drink a ton of water to flush out that excess sodium, unless you eat a lot of potassium to help that process occur, you're going to be walking around with an excess amount of sodium in your blood, and that causes some hormonal changes that are associated with the risk for developing diabetes, kidney disease, and other diseases. So you can get your fluid from water, you can get it from diet soda, you can get it from coffee, and you can get it from tea. Up to 300 milligrams of coffee per day will suit you. Anything over that, and the diuretic effect of coffee may offset the fluid that you're taking in. You can drink a lot more iced tea and green tea, but you got to make sure and either drink it unsweetened or mildly sweetened, not like sweet tea, because then you're just going to aggravate other health problems. Okay, another common cause of fatigue is lack of sleep, and the CDC estimates that roughly 1 out of 3 of us is not getting adequate sleep. And the clients I work with are very surprised to find out that lack of sleep is a major cause of lack of sleep is not getting enough physical activity. So they become trapped in this kind of a vicious circle where because they're fatigued, they don't have the energy to exercise. And because they're not exercising, they're not tired enough to sleep well at night. And so they spend a lot of their time overnight awake or tossing and turning. And too many of us are just very active on social media late in the evening. We're on Instagram, we're checking our Facebook pages, looking to see what our friends or family members are doing, or we're staying up late and watching TV. And so we're losing sleep like that. Most people are getting 5 to 6 hours at best, and we do well when we get at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night. Another interesting fact about sleep: most people might think that our ancient ancestors fell asleep soon after the sun went down because without light, your melatonin production kicks in and you get sleepy. But the science says that most humans fell asleep roughly 3.5 hours after sundown. That would have meant that they were going to sleep about 10 o'clock or as late as 11 o'clock at night. So that's okay. If you're going to sleep at 10 or 11 and you're getting up at 6 or 7, you're going to get enough sleep. But if you're staying up to midnight or later, you're probably not. And another problem my clients have is when they stay up late, they start to get hungry again. It's been 5 or 6 hours since they ate dinner, and naturally they run out of energy. And if they're not asleep, they start getting hungry. And when is the absolute worst time at night to eat? It's late in the evening because the calories have nowhere to go but in storage. So there are problems for weight gain, and there are also other problems for brain health that I will get into a little bit later in this presentation if I have time. So lack of exercise means lack of sleep, and it also means not feeling tired enough to sleep well, staying up late, and eating too much. That can lead to obesity, excess weight gain. That itself is associated with fatigue. And guess what happens when folks start to lose excess weight? Guess what happens to their energy level? It starts to pick up again. So if you're a person who is overweight and really tired, if you can lose some of that excess weight, you should see an increase in energy for every few pounds that you lose. And if you don't, then you got to talk to somebody like me to find out what else might be at the root of your fatigue. And let me back up a second by bringing that topic up. If you correct one or two problems that you believe are causing your fatigue and you're still tired, keep in mind that fatigue can really be like peeling away the layers of an onion. It can have multiple determinants. And in fact, for so many of us to be affected, it's got to have multiple determinants. There have to be several things. I've mentioned a few already: lack of sleep, lack of fluid intake, excess weight, but there are a lot of other reasons. So as we continue, keep in mind that you may have to address many of these. Another one of these is depression, and major depression is only present in roughly 1 out of 14 people, I believe. But chronic low-grade depression or dysthymia can also be involved with fatigue, and you may have to address that as well. And that's something that is also very common in the population, and it can be caused by a multitude of factors. Lack of sleep can contribute to depression. Dysfunctional childhood and family upbringing can contribute to depression. Marital problems, financial problems, poor nutrition, and I will talk specifically about diet and brain health later to give you some examples of how nutrition figures into depression and fatigue. But there's so many things that can cause depression, and the problem is once most people address it medically, they figure that's the end to the problem. I've had a lot of clients telling me, yeah, but I'm on medication. I'm taking my Prozac. I'm taking my Lexapro, but they don't get rid of the fatigue. That's because, as I said, there are so many causes for fatigue. You cannot expect medication to address all of those. You've got to not just take your medication as prescribed. You've got to do what you can to address the depression, which includes things like getting physical activity, which is the number one non-pharmacologic treatment for depression. Getting good sleep, eating healthier, and considering psychotherapy, because there's a limit to what you can achieve with medication. Some people may need to be on two medications, but they also are likely to benefit from psychotherapy and from lifestyle therapy. There are a lot of great self-help books on depression that should consider checking out. And in your library for free, there's an online course for treating depression, which is also free. And you can contact me about that, and I'll give you the address if you can't find it yourselves. Another common cause of fatigue is diet. So this is a big one because there are many aspects of poor nutrition that can contribute to fatigue. There are poor protein choices, poor choices of fat intake, and poor choices of carb intake, or bad carbs versus good carbs. So let's start with carbs because they're the most controversial. Okay. Anybody who's been reading health information knows that we need some carbohydrate because it helps our brains make serotonin. And serotonin allows us to regulate appetite, and it allows us to maintain a calm mood, but it's also the precursor of melatonin, which is our sleep hormone. So there's a delicate balance whereby we don't want to get too much serotonin in our brains, but we want to get some. And most Americans, at least the ones that I've been speaking to, are trying to lose weight by cutting out carbohydrates almost entirely. They're eating meat and vegetables for meals, but they're not eating any starches, and they're even afraid to eat fruits. Until I explain to them that the calories that they're eating at night, see, these folks get hungry because they're not eating enough starch or carbs during the day, and they get so hungry that by the evening, even though they've had dinner, they're starved. So out come the chips and the cookies and the popcorn and the pretzels. And when I explain to them that all these foods you're eating are 110 to 150 calories per ounce, where fruit is 15 calories per ounce, and your staple carbs, the ones you've cut out because you're afraid they'll cause you to gain weight, like potatoes, rice, and pasta, are only 25 to 40 calories per ounce, which is anywhere between 3 and 6 times less in calories than those bad carbs that they're eating. It blows their minds. And most of my clients start to rediscover the low calorie, high water, low fat starches that they've given up years ago, and they realize that it's a good way to be full on without getting too many calories. These low calorie starches also provide fiber and vitamins and minerals, which have an anti-inflammatory effect. And this is key to this a discussion of fatigue, because chronic low grade inflammation is not only at the root of most chronic diseases, it's at the root of fatigue. And I'll discuss how these processes interact with each other right after I talk about carbs. So, what are good carbs? If you know the difference between good and bad carbs, this is a repeat for you. But in general, good carbs are the ones that grow out of the ground and they're unprocessed or minimally processed. So, white rice would be a refined carb. Some would say a bad carb. Brown rice and wild rice would be good carbs. Whole potatoes and sweet potatoes, purple potatoes, yellow potatoes, red potatoes would be whole food carbs. French fries would be processed or bad carbs. Okay. Pasta is kind of a different story. Most people blame pasta for causing weight gain, but the fact is that pasta, it has a unique type of starch that is broken down very slowly, so it does not raise blood sugar level more quickly like white bread or an equivalent amount of sugar would do. And especially if you get the whole grain pastas that are available, the ones that are made from whole grains or chickpeas or lentils or artichoke, you can get a much healthier product that will add to the anti-inflammatory effect of the other good carbs that you're eating. Okay, so let me take a break for a second before I talk about the effects of protein and fat choices on fatigue, because I mentioned chronic low-grade inflammation and brain and fatigue and brain health. The way this works is when you are experiencing inflammation, and your physician can test for this by looking at something called C-reactive protein or CRP. If it's elevated and you've got inflammation going on, the inflammation occurs in your brain as well as in your body. And in your brain, what happens is you lose the ability to make the brain chemicals that help regulate mood and energy level. So some of you are more familiar with some of these. You've heard of serotonin, you've heard of dopamine, probably have not heard of glutamine, gamma aminobutyric acid or GABA, norepinephrine, which is the brain's version of adrenaline, or histamine. You've heard of antihistamines, but you may not know that histamine is a neurotransmitter. Nitric oxide is a neurotransmitter. Some of these increase wakefulness. Some of these cause sleepiness. And I'm going to go to the slides in this presentation to give you a little bit more information about some of these. And I'll come back to this slide a little bit later. Okay, brain chemistry and fatigue. Okay, so it's important to understand that brain chemistry is the result of a combination of neurotransmitters, not one or two acting by themselves. They act on the brain, but they also temper the actions of each other. So those are the ones that I mentioned. The ones associated with wakefulness include glutamate, norepinephrine, dopamine, and histamine. And the ones associated with sleepiness include serotonin, GABA, and nitric oxide. And what happens with stressors like lack of fluid, lack of sleep, physical inactivity, toxic exposures, infection, chronic disease, all of which create chronic inflammation, is that they release immune system chemical called cytokines. Many of you have heard of some of these, I'm sure, like interferon. Uh, Less well-known ones include interleukin 1, interleukin 6, tumor necrosis factor, and there are many others. And these are not just linked with depression, which is itself linked with fatigue. They also cause sickness behavior. Sickness behavior includes feeling of malaise, sleepiness, lack of ability to concentrate, a feeling of just not wanting to do anything. And the way these immune system chemicals work on the brain is they lower the ability of a protein enzyme, which is called BH4 or tetrahydrobiopterin, that we need to make norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin. They also can increase the uptake of these chemicals by nerve terminals. So the end result is you lose production of these chemicals that help keep you awake, and you increase their removal. So you wind up with less of these mood regulating chemicals than you would normally have in a healthy brain. And so the result is feelings of depression and a lack of fatigue. Okay, and see, so these are some of the strategies I talked about for improving fatigue. But let me go back to the topic of nutrition and fatigue. So, fat choices involve inflammation as well. As a matter of fact, before carbohydrates and protein were known to influence inflammation, many years before that, back in the 80s, in fact, the influence of fats on inflammation was becoming known, especially the anti inflammatory effects of fish oils or omega 3s. More recently, the pro inflammatory effects of saturated fats became more well known. So, what's the difference between saturated fats and unsaturated fats? In general, saturated fats are pro inflammatory and they come from animal products. Now, over the past few years, research has been published indicating that not all saturated fats do that the saturated fats in dairy foods may not act in a pro-inflammatory capacity, whereas the saturated fats from red meat or from tropical oils seem to do that to a greater extent. But if you don't want to get confused by having to parse your intake of saturated fats, just keep in mind that reducing animal products in general and consuming small amounts of animal products that are low in fat or non-fat really is the way to go. What you really want to do for a healthy brain is get more unsaturated fat. And there are two sources of unsaturated fat. One of them is plant foods, and the other one is fish. So many Americans, I'd say most Americans, certainly just about everybody I speak to, is aware of the health benefits of omega 3s, even though they may not know that omega 3s have an anti inflammatory effect. But most people conclude after speaking with me about this that they need to eat more fish, right? And so many of you, I'm sure, have switched from red meat to fish, or from maybe from chicken to more fish. But here's the problem with that: we're depleting the oceans of fish. All over the world, we're overfishing the oceans, and the result is it's contributing to global warming. So we've got to find another way to get these long chain omega 3 fatty acids. It may be simpler and cheaper in the long run to just get an EPA DHA supplement made from algae, and that's something that I believe can be made in a laboratory without depleting the fish stocks, so that future generations have not only the fish that they need for protein, but also we don't overfish the oceans and contribute to further global warming. By far, though, the greatest source of unsaturated fats is plant foods. Most of you are familiar with olive oil, and nuts and avocados. Those are probably the three most commonly eaten sources of unsaturated fat. Canola oil is also a good source of unsaturated fat because it's got some plant source omega 3s, and it's saturated, and its fat composition is more like olive oil than any other fat. Keep it refrigerated to keep it fresh, though, because it does tend to go bad more easily than olive oil would. But it is the most desirable cooking oil to use apart from olive oil, and a good, like I said, a good way to get omega 3 fats. And these fats can represent 25, 30, up to 35% of the calories in your diet. They don't necessarily interfere with weight gain, and because they're known to have anti-inflammatory effects, they should help contribute to less fatigue and a better energy level. And that brings us to our protein choices, because protein choices can also be a source of fat, right? If you're eating eggs every morning, and most of the people I speak with are eating whole eggs every morning, and sometimes with cheese and sometimes with butter on their toast, that means a really high fat, saturated fat breakfast, which is going to do nothing good for your weight, nothing good for your energy level. If you want to have eggs a couple of times per week, that doesn't seem to be a problem when we look at the epidemiology research on eggs and health. Having eggs that infrequently does not seem to cause problems. But again, like I said, most of the clients I speak with are eating eggs every day of the week or most days of the week, and they're not just eating egg whites. But that would be a reasonable change, to switch from whole eggs to more egg whites if you still want to get your protein boost in the morning without getting too much animal fat. You can also switch from eating animal-based sausage products to plant-based sausage products, which are some brands are made mainly with unsaturated fat, so you do have to read the label, because others are made with coconut oil, and so are going to have as much saturated fat or more than regular sausage would have. Um, when it comes to proteins that you eat for meals, though, the most recent and important finding is that plant protein will do a lot more for your health, including your brain health, than animal protein will, for many reasons. First of all, plant protein is easier to digest because it's got a higher fiber content, whereas animal protein has zero fiber. Plant protein has a lot of vitamins and minerals and antioxidants that animal protein does not have, and it has the benefit of having unsaturated fats, especially if you eat things like nuts or soy products. The research is showing that people who eat the most plant protein, who get the most of their protein, total protein, from plant foods, have a lower risk for dying from any and all causes. This is something called all-cause mortality. And the people who eat most of their protein from animal foods have the highest all-cause mortality, which means dying from any and all causes, most of which is common chronic diseases like heart disease, cancer, stroke, and diabetes. Okay, so one way to tweak your protein intake to boost your energy would be to eat more legumes, more lentils, and more beans. Use more nuts and nut butters as a protein source, and investigate some of the meat substitutes that are available, and try some of the higher protein pastas. You can easily get enough protein, plenty of protein at a meal, eating a high protein pasta and having a salad with some chickpeas, or a bean or lentil soup, or some vegetarian chili with brown rice. You don't have to worry that you're going to be protein deficient if you're planning your meals like that. So just to recap, carbs and fats and protein can all impact inflammation, and so they can all impact your energy level. And I know I talked about a lot of aspects of these macronutrients here. If you can't remember all this stuff and you want to recap, please contact me with the information I'll provide at the end of this talk. Okay, so what else influences fatigue? We talked about food. We've talked, oh, I did not mention the size of your meals, and that's something I should have actually brought up first. Um, Large meals have a tendency to make people feel more fatigued than small meals. Uh, and you know this if you can remember the last large meal you ate, whether it was this past Christmas or Thanksgiving or maybe your birthday or some celebration. When you eat a bunch of turkey and dressing and mashed potatoes with gravy and cranberry sauce, you typically feel so sleepy after that meal that you don't want to do anything. Same thing goes for a fast food meal and for any large meal. It may not include a healthy low fat, plant based meal, though. If you eat a large meal consisting of a salad, a soup, and say again some vegetarian chili with brown rice and a piece of fruit at the end, you've eaten quite a lot of food, but you would not expect to feel lack of energy after that meal. If anything, you might feel more energetic because it digests well and then provides a lot of nutrients that you need to make these brain chemicals. Nick asked a question on YouTube. Apart from eating well and getting my 8 hours of sleep, what else can I do to fight fatigue? Hey, Nick, that's a really excellent question. I'm going to talk about that in just a couple of minutes when I get into the impact of dietary supplements on fatigue. So stick around for that, and I will get into that. Thanks for asking. Okay, so we went over this. All right, so just to recap, addressing causes of fatigue includes uh, coping with your stress by getting more recreation, uh, ditching most, not all processed foods because there are actually some healthy processed foods, minimizing saturated fat and tropical oils, and following evidence-based guidelines for fruit, vegetable, and whole grain and legume intake, which is 5 fruits and vegetables per day, 3 servings of whole grains, and at least a half a cup of legumes per day, and getting more protein from plants instead of animals. All right, so we talked about depression already, and now we'll talk about supplements a little bit. So the supplements question is really a complicated one because uh, you may find that you've taken supplements in the past that you felt really helped to begin with, but then the effect seemed to wear off really quickly. And if that's the case, it may be because it was a placebo effect all along. Our desire to believe that we can find a pill that gives us the energy we need without requiring a prescription, without having dangerous side effects. And for something like that to work reliably, repeatedly, that really is a lot to ask. And so there are actually very few things in this category that are evidence based. And what's complicating the discovery or the proving of the ones that are already out there is that the research budget for them is very low. The supplement manufacturers are not going to put money into the research because other companies will reap the benefits of their research. This is why drug companies put money into research, because they have a proprietary product that only they can benefit from, and supplement manufacturers can't do that. There are some supplement manufacturers that have proprietary products that publish research on their own products, but you can't really trust them because you have to take their word that their product is having a beneficial effect, and that type of research is generally considered pretty poor quality. So one of the problems with supplements that are on the market is, according to studies that have been done on the active amount of ingredients in a supplement, they can either have very little of the active ingredient, they can have a fraction of it, or they can have a mega dose of the active ingredient. And this is the problem with natural products. I was talking with a client yesterday about this. He was telling me that he ate a lot of Brazil nuts. And I told him about a video that I saw on Dr. Michael Greger's nutritionfacts.org website, in which Dr. Greger explains that Brazil nuts can have a low amount, a moderate amount, or a mega dose of selenium. And this gentleman was eating a handful of Brazil nuts every day until I explained to him that the amount of selenium he was getting could be enough to cause cancer if he ate these on a regular basis, or cause diabetes. That's a consequence of getting an excess amount of selenium in the diet. It's just as dangerous as not getting enough selenium. So even natural products that come in the form of food have this problem. So natural products like herbs have similar problems. Uh, Herbs are the worst when it comes to this, because there's really no way to guarantee that a crop of herbs is going to have the same amount of exact ingredient. The same thing goes for foods. Like I was saying, foods are always going to contain different amounts of beta carotene and vitamin C, depending on the sunlight, the soil conditions, the amount of rain and humidity, and other factors. So this is one problem with herbal supplements. Another problem is that with all supplements, not just herbal products, they're not regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. So many times you get only a fraction or sometimes none of an active ingredient that you're buying a supplement for. Sometimes you're getting a product that is tainted with medications or even heavy metals like mercury. So this is a problem that really needs to go away. It needs regulation, and it needs a way for the supplement manufacturers to be able to make money and yet sell an honest, decent product that people are going to benefit from. We need a lot more education on this. The National Institutes of Health has a dietary supplements branch, and what we really need from those folks is more clinical trials on dietary supplements that can help with fatigue. All right, so supplements that have been found to reduce fatigue or improve energy include some herbal products, specifically ginseng and rhodiola, amino acids like carnitine, L-carnitine, and histidine, and coenzyme Q10. And a word of caution here, some herbal products like ginseng have shown up in the scientific literature as causing harmful side effects in large amounts. And this is another problem with supplements. We think that because they're natural, that they can't harm us. So many of us will go far past the recommended dose, and we'll get into mega dosing. And especially if you're taking medications, this can become very dangerous. You've always got to let your doc know what supplements you're taking. And unfortunately, even that might not be adequate, because you can't expect your physician to know herbal pharmacology or the pharmacology of dietary supplements. This is something that you've either got to consult a qualified professional about, or you've got to do a heck of a lot of research on your own to make sure that you're not harming yourself. Far less risk seems to be associated with amino acids, because your brain and your gut and your liver and your brain are just used to handling combinations of amino acids. So I can't find much evidence, hardly any, in fact, on any dangers associated with taking amino acid supplements or coenzyme Q10. All right, let me go back and talk about these in a little bit more detail. Okay, so herbal supplements work through well-grounded pharmacologic mechanisms. In other words, when doctors and pharmacists look at uh, the actual mechanisms whereby drugs work, the herbal products work off the same types of mechanisms. Herbal products may increase the production of heat shock proteins that are associated with increasing our response to stress. Some of them work by increasing the activity of G proteins, which convert extracellular signals to intracellular signals. So these things do really work, and I'm sure many of you have heard that that nature was the first pharmacy, right? That a lot of our drugs came from plant products, and this is correct. And but they undergo, of course, extreme testing to develop them into medications, and then after they develop, they're trialed on human volunteers to make sure that they're not only effective but also safe. Amino acids work by actually changing brain chemistry. Okay, um, histidine is one of these. It seems to be the only one that is really evidence based. I mentioned before that histidine is one of these neurotransmitters that helps keep us awake and alert. And the the doses that have been used in clinical studies include anywhere from roughly 3 grams per day to 24 grams per day. Now 24 grams is really a crazy amount to use. If you consider that most people don't need more than about 60 grams of protein per day, taking 24 grams of histidine sounds like to me like a way to really risk some health problems by interfering with the metabolism of our other amino acids. But again, if you want to use this, it can be ordered, but you've got to talk to a qualified healthcare practitioner and let your physician know that you're using it, because you just don't know. Everybody's body is different. Everybody's ability to break down xenobiotics, which are all foreign compounds but include natural ones. Everybody's ability is different, so you never know how your body is going to react. But in clinical studies, histidine was shown to have an anti-fatigue effect. It's really interesting how this was discovered. The Japanese use a food product called bonito, which is dried skipjack tuna, and it's used to make broths that are the basis for soups and some other recipes. And bonito broth has about 10% histidine, which is really a lot for a food product to contain, considering that there are so many other amino acids. For it to contain 10% of them from histidine really is kind of off the charts. And they kind of discovered many years ago that bonito has kind of an anti-fatigue effect, and that's what led them to do more research on giving human volunteers larger doses of histidine. So I can put you in contact with some of the research articles on histidine if you're interested. Again, just contact me after this is over, and send me an email address, and I can get those to you. Coenzyme Q10 really has the best reputation as an energy supplement, and it was applied many years ago. I was reading about this stuff in the early 1980s, so that's almost 40 years ago. Uh, Coenzyme Q10 was applied to cardiovascular disease, particularly heart failure and cardiomyopathies, and shown to have cardiostimulant effect, a blood pressure lowering effect, a therapeutic effect in patients with heart failure. But it's more recently been applied to patients with neurologic diseases and shown to have an anti-fatigue effect. So it appears to work in the brain as well as it works in the heart muscle. All right, so we are almost at the end of our time here. So let me just mention that you guys can get in touch with me through Kounsel, and that's my name again. I'll come back to that slide in a second. Those are the references if anybody wants to read some of them. And that is what Fatigue Fighters looks like. I hope you like the cover. I didn't create it, but I think it's appropriate for the topic. And I'll go back to the email here. All right, so I'm going to stop now and get ready to take some questions. And if we don't have any, then you guys will get to break a little bit early. Okay, No questions? All right, I'll hang in there for a couple of minutes. All right. Well, thank you everybody for attending. I appreciate it. And if you want to learn more about how to boost your energy, and okay, I think we see some questions starting to come in now. So keep in mind that I touched on these aspects of fatigue in a very kind of topical way. There's a lot more specific information that I can share with you either in the book or in person. Anna asked this question from Twitter. Is it normal to feel spacey and lightheaded on a diet? Yeah, Anna, that's a really great question. And yeah, anytime you depart from your normal way of doing things, it's a stress on your system. So if you think about all the things that can happen on a diet, let's say you put yourself on a low calorie diet. Well, you could lose a bunch of weight, and the first type of weight you lose is water. So you could potentially become a little dehydrated, and that would make you feel a little lightheaded and spacey, or probably an even more likely candidate if you're putting yourself on a low calorie diet is just simply low blood sugar, just from not getting as many calories as you normally would. And those would be the most obvious reasons. And then there are some more covert ones. That's a great question, Anna. Thank you for asking it. All right, we got a question from Stephanie on LinkedIn. How can I incorporate meat in my diet after being a vegetarian for over 3 years? Do you have any tips for me? Yeah, oh gosh, Stephanie, I'm so glad you asked this question. Personally, professionally, I don't think that meat eating is the problem that a lot of vegetarians make it out to be. I think the problem is the amount of meat we eat and the frequency with which we eat it. Before people could afford to eat a lot of meat, a family might take one piece of chicken and cut it up into tiny pieces and put it in a soup for everyone to have with vegetables and with maybe some beans for additional protein and maybe some kind of grain like rice or barley, and it would make a very hearty, very filling type of meal, and everybody would get a little bit of animal protein without getting the mega dose that most Americans get. So just to come full circle back to your question, I think the best way to incorporate meat in your diet is as a flavoring or as a small part of a meal rather than have it occupy a third or a quarter of your plate like it does with most Americans. If you look at the size of a chicken breast now compared to what it was in the 60s and 70s, I mean it's like Godzilla. You know, a chicken breast used to be 2 to 3 ounces of meat, and now it's 8 ounces. That's way too much for one person. And it's so hard to digest. Many people, especially older people, know this, and they stop eating less meat because of how difficult it is on their digestion. Thank you for asking that question, Stephanie. That was a really good one. All right, another question from Diane. Based on your experience, what do you think is the safest way to lose 80 pounds and keep it off? Okay, Diane, thank you for asking that question, and I'm sure it's one that a lot of other people would want to ask. My experience in weight management goes back to when I was 15 years old. Professionally, it goes back to the late 80s and early 90s when I started working in a medical group and teaching weight management. The best way to safely lose 80 pounds is to try to lose it between 1.5 and 1.5 pounds per week and give yourself a couple of years to do it. There's a lot of research on the people who lose weight and keep it off. And some of that research shows, in fact, all of it shows that they're patient with the process. They allow themselves to make mistakes during the process and to and to learn from those mistakes and correct them. You're not always going to lose weight every week, but you're going to have a lot of great weeks where you lose 1.5 or 2 pounds, and then some weeks where you may lose nothing, or some weeks where you may gain a half a pound or a pound. That's perfectly okay. That's part of the learning process. You can't succeed until you fail enough times and learn from those failures. So I would suggest you follow a mainly, not exclusively if you don't want to, but a mainly plant-based eating pattern, because that's what will fill you up the most on the fewest calories and keep you the most healthy and allow you to feel well, including feeling energetic. Um, and if you have more specific questions about that, Diane, please contact me. Thank you for asking that. We're doing great here, folks. Thanks for sending those questions. Got just a few minutes left, so any last minute questions would be appreciated. Diane said thank you and asked another one. Thank you, Diane. My brother eats nothing but junk food, fast food, chips, unhealthy every single day, and drinks a ton of soda and beer, and yet he is still lean and muscular. How is this possible? Well, I know you don't want to hear this, Diane, but a lot of it is genetic. Some of it is lifestyle related. I don't know if your brother is physically active. You did not mention that, but I can tell you that there are a lot of people, including people I've grown up with, friends of mine, who were extremely slim, very thin for many years throughout their teens and early 20s. And then what happens to these folks when they get into their 30s and 40s is the opposite starts to happen. They start to gain weight, and they have none of the tools that they need to lose the weight and to keep it off, because they've never had to deal with that sort of pressure, and it totally overwhelms them. So folks like you and me, who may have started off in life heavy or with a tendency to be heavy, if we learn good eating and physical activity habits, in a few years of practicing those, we can enjoy being relatively slim for the rest of our lives by putting in that effort at that time. Whereas these folks who coasted on their genetic abilities for all these years just get totally overwhelmed when they hit their 40s and 50s, and usually it leads them to a lot of chronic health problems, and then they're forced to start to have to learn these things. And it's much more difficult to learn good eating and activity habits at that age than it is when we're younger. Thank you for both questions, Diane. I appreciate that. If I was paying people per question, I'd have to write you a check at this time. All right. Nelson asked this question from Twitter. I'm feeling prolonged, chronically fatigued. I have been a therapist to my family and friends way more in the past 2 years. I am wondering if it's solely physical or from overloaded compassion. What can I do to reduce my fatigue? Wow, what a great question. Yeah, Nelson, you may be suffering from an input-output imbalance. If you spend so much of your time giving to others, but you don't take time to give to yourself, then you can understand why you would feel burnt out. I mean, this is the essence of what physicians and other healthcare professionals talk about when they talk about burnout, right? Which certainly can lead to feeling fatigued. And right, as a matter of fact, I read something in medical economics recently. 36% of physicians are complaining about feeling excessively fatigued. That's more than 1 out of 3 of our docs. And of course, this may be related to the COVID epidemic in part, and for other physicians, it may be to just having an overloaded schedule because of their practices being too busy, or maybe the corporations they work for demanding that they see a patient every 10 or 15 minutes. Yeah, anybody who puts themselves in this position needs to purposely give themselves 3-day weekends, time for themselves in the evening, go get a massage, go away for a 3-day weekend, meditate, uh, join a health club where there's a swimming pool, join some meetup groups where you can just do activities with people, go bowling, play shoot pool, play cards, go dancing, go to exotic restaurants. Yeah, you've got to find the time to give back to yourself in order to be able to continue giving to others. Nelson, thank you for that really great question. That really needed to be asked. All right, looks like we've got time for maybe one more question because we are coming up on 1 o'clock real quick. All right, last question. Monica asked this. I used to drink coffee nearly every day and caffeinated sodas every once in a while. I had COVID, so I stopped drinking caffeine. I decided to try a cup of coffee. I regretted it. That night, my stomach was in pain and I had stomach cramps so bad. Wow. Any tips to add caffeine back to my diet? Yes, grind your own beans and enjoy it. No, just kidding. Um, yeah, caffeine is a gastric stimulant, which means it can cause acid production. That's why I had to switch to decaf. It can also stimulate your bowels, cause you to run to the bathroom. One way to add caffeine back to your diet would be to drink tea. Tea's got like 50 milligrams per cup, whereas a cup of coffee usually has about 200. Soda, I'm not sure about. I think it's got maybe 70, 80 milligrams of caffeine, but I'd have to look that up. So I would say you do it slowly. There are tremendous health benefits to tea and coffee that we should not go without if we enjoy those beverages. So I would say just take it slow. Maybe drink a half a cup of coffee instead of a full cup. Don't perk it too strong if you can, and just give your body a chance to get used to it. Apparently, you're one of those folks who is not a quick caffeine metabolizer like myself and a lot of others. Thank you, Monica. Appreciate you asking the question. All right, folks, that's just about it for questions. Thank you, everybody, so much for attending. I hope to see you again at a future presentation. Please have a wonderful weekend and stay safe. Bye now.